Welcome to the Sports Motivation Podcast. This is Niyi Sobo, former NFL running back, now mindset coach, teaching you to be supremely confident, fearless, infinitely prepared, and consistently dominating under pressure. So listen up, take notes. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Sports Motivation Podcast. This is your host, Niyi Sobo. This is called the Sports Motivation Podcast. But the way that I think, the way that I have approached this podcast in general is this is built for a certain type of person. And a lot of you are competitive, you play sports, etc. But a lot of you have been drawn here, even though you don't necessarily play a sport at a high level right now. Maybe you did at one point, but you relate to the athlete, if you will. And so there's a great book called Principles by Ray Dalio, and in it he describes the 5 steps to getting what you want. And I'll tell you the 5 steps really quick. This is an amazing book, one of the top 3 most important books that I've read, so I definitely recommend this. But he says, number 1, you got to identify your goals very clearly. But he says right after that, you have to identify problems that are in your way. So most people jump from identifying goals to creating a plan. But he says you have to identify problems. And then he takes it a step further and says you need to diagnose your problems and underneath what's at the root of your problems. Because only then can you go to step number 4, which is create a plan or design a plan that's actually going to eliminate the problems and get to where it is that you want. And then, of course, number 5 is execute, which is very important as well. Nothing matters if you don't execute. So I'm saying all that because while you're an athlete, while we talk a lot about sports, we talk a lot about peak performance, we talk a lot about how to perform under pressure, what prevents us from doing a lot of that are emotions that come up. And the emotions have to do with a lot of things that don't have anything to do with sports, seemingly, right? But what we need to start realizing is that our lives are woven together. Everything has an impact. How you were raised has an impact on how you play your sport, on how you approach your sport, on how you approach your teammates. Your relationship with your mother and your father have an impact on how you relate to the opposite sex. Your relationship problems are causing you problems in school, in your sport, in your jobs, in your businesses, etc. All right. So what I'm going to be talking about today is something really heavy, really deep. And it really has a lot to do with how you've been conditioned in the past. So it's how you basically establish a new identity for yourself and get rid of old beliefs, usually religion, philosophical things, ways that you were raised. A lot of times we grow up and we were raised a certain way. You were raised Catholic. You were raised Christian, Jehovah's Witness. You were raised Muslim. And let's say you don't feel like that's what you want to be. Let's say you realize, you know what, that's not really who I am. Like, I actually want to start experimenting with something different. Let's say you're raised even playing a certain sport and you have a lot of pressure to play this sport. How do you stay true to who you are without alienating everyone else and without totally fracturing all of the valuable relationships that you've created? How do you make it so you can still go back to mom's house even though you don't have the same religion as mom? How do you make it so that your friends actually accept you and not disown you, even though the very basis upon which you became friends is now no longer true? Again, whether that's religious, whether that's, some choice, even becoming a vegan, right? That can create a lot of rifts in people's families. Let's say you grew up in a family where you're barbecuing all the time, eating chicken wings, hot dogs, burgers, and now you come back home, you don't eat that shit no more. And some people take it personally, right? So it's tough, and it's tough to recreate yourself when you've been so heavily indoctrinated in something. You've been so well conditioned to believe certain things. I was raised in the church. I do not go to church anymore. That decision has created tension in a lot of my very close relationships. And I say close as in what were once close or what we're supposed to be close. Family. My oldest daughter, I've seen her twice in the past year. And the reason is because she's decided to be a Jehovah's Witness. And her mother was once a Jehovah's Witness, my wife. And she's choosing to interpret, her religion in such a way that she says, you know what, I can't have anything to do with you unless you are a part of my religion. This is my oldest daughter. So it's tough. It's hit me in a lot of ways, in a lot of angles. And what I want to share with you all is my progression to the place where I'm at now, which is very, very confident in who I am, what I believe, high standards in terms of what I allow myself to be involved with or not, and also at a place where I feel at peace with a lot of the relationships that I have in my life. And I want to share with you some of the actual realities of what it looks like to reconstruct your identity, how to approach some of those relationships without compromising who it is that you are, and how to gain clarity on what you stand for, which I believe is the most important thing. Because you're fighting these old beliefs and you want to break free, but you're unclear and you don't know what you believe. So it's almost like you've gotten rid of your clothes, but now you're sitting there naked. You don't have no other clothes to put on. So it's important that you start putting together your own outfits, that you start being clear on who it is that you are and what you want to do, and know how to approach the fact that some people will no longer fuck with you, and how to preserve the positive relationships and actually build on them in spite of the fact that you may have differences with people. Because you probably have relationships with people where they don't believe what you believe, but that's not going to make you stop talking to them necessarily, right? Maybe you won't spend as much time together, but maybe you still even do. You knowing what your values are and what's important to you, this is all very important. All right. So let me explain the process step by step. And again, everyone's process is going to be different. I'm not suggesting that it needs to look exactly like this, but I believe these are phases that one needs to go through in order to recreate themselves and feel confident in who they are, despite how you've been raised, how you've been conditioned, etc. All right. So first things first, this might seem like a no-brainer, but I'm often surprised at how many people who are, in their 20s who still live at home with their parents. Now, it was always known for me growing up. It was very clear. It was like you're gone when you're 18, so it wasn't even a question. And I happen to agree with that philosophy for a lot of reasons, but everyone has their own philosophy, and even my oldest son is 14, and I've told them the same thing. Like I'm preparing them to be on their own. And when I think about my son leaving, I get a little sad, man. I don't want my sons leaving. I don't want any of my kids leaving, but I'm saying my oldest son because we've created a friendship together. We actually work out and shit. We hang out. He's a good friend of mine. So I don't look forward to my son leaving. And I know there's a lot of parents out there who are like, man, we're going to support you and we want you to come back and stay in the house. I would love for my kids to be around, right? Now, the reality is I take that back. There might be a way. I don't know of a way, though, that you can recreate your identity while still living at home with your parents. So that needs to be step number one. And again, I'm not saying this is not necessarily for the high schoolers. You're obviously in your home. For those of you who have done with high school, you're get out in the real world. Separate from the home. That's a prerequisite for establishing a new identity. As long as you're in the home, you're basically communicating to your parents that you are not independent enough to take care of yourself. And so naturally, they're going to treat you like a child. How do you expect them not to? You've been a child for this entire time, even though you've hit these benchmarks, 18, 21, this, but you still living at home. You got to separate from the home because that allows you the space in order to start identifying what you actually really want. There's a lot of cultures that have very clear-cut rite of passage rituals that are designed specifically to allow young boys and young girls to separate so as to create their identity. It's an important part in the developmental stage of all humans. We have to recreate our identity, but the problem is a lot of us don't go through that because that's not a big thing here in America. It's actually becoming more and more accepted to live with your parents. So it's not a knock on, it is a knock. Never mind. It is a knock on living with your parents. Get out of the house. Get out of the house. Find a way. Even living with roommates is better. Get out of the house. Separate from mom and dad. That's first step. Next thing is you have to, at some point, make a conscious decision about what and who you actually want to be in your life, right? Now, I'm not necessarily saying, religion necessarily, right? It's not like you have to make every decision just yet, but make a decision for yourself about who you want to be and where you're going in life. And again, for a lot of you, this is not a problem. You've already decided that. But I don't want to take for granted these very important steps. Decide who you want to be in life. Create some goals for yourself once you've separated from the home. The next thing that you have to do, this is the really messy phase. And this really came from me when I was done playing football and I had a really bad breakup with the mother of my two sons. And I was in a lot of pain and I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I was faced with this like reality of like, oh shit, I actually might have to be like get a job and, like do all these things that I never really wanted to do, but I haven't really been prepared to do anything different outside of football. And so this is when you face the reality of your past. You identify all the rifts. So you start to question everything. This is really when you question a lot. You question how you were raised. You question what you learned about relationships when you were young. You question what you were taught in church. You don't throw it out. You question it. You hold it up to light. Because up until now, everything has been very, very unconscious underneath the surface. It's been conditioned. You've just been told since the time you were born, your parents had a plan for you. They said, this is how we're going to teach them. They might not have done that consciously, but they had a plan. We want to put them in this place. We want them to play sports. We want them to think this. We want them to be religious. We want them to think like this. They conditioned you. So now that you separated, you started to decide where you want to go. You have to bring to light everything. What's your philosophy on religion? What's your philosophy on this? What's your philosophy on raising children? What's your philosophy on marriage? Maybe you were taught one thing. This is really, really important. And for me, at this stage of my life, I was getting ready to get married to someone I really had no business getting married to. And so luckily, I didn't get married to this person. But that forced me to really ask myself, why was I getting ready to get married to this person? What about my beliefs? What made me say that was a good decision? Because it clearly wasn't, but there was some unconscious desire to accomplish this goal, and I had to bring it to light. So the question becomes, how do you do this? And again, it's kind of a messy process, but first things first, you got to get a therapist or a counselor. You got to find someone that can sit, someone who's skilled at asking questions, that's skilled at listening, and skilled at allowing you the space to be honest and begin to process how you're feeling. This is super, super important. I can't remember where I read this from, but they talked about the value of counseling, because I know there's a lot of you who think that counseling is kind of corny and it's not very helpful just because you're sitting around talking about your problems. I can understand that mental framework, if you will, but let me share with you something that maybe will help you look at it in a different way. In this book, and again, if I remember, I'll mention it and I'll put it in the show notes of this episode. But in this book, the lady was talking about how the fact that counseling, when you talk with someone about your past, the painful aspects of your past, first of all, there's a lot of things that happen in your past that are painful for you. And what you've done is you've covered them up. This is why you don't talk about them. But in counseling, when you do talk about them and you talk about it with someone who you trust, what that does is create new associations to the trauma. So now you don't think of the trauma with as much pain. You now can say, you can associate talking about that trauma and that trauma with the fact that you're in the presence of someone who you trust. And this allows you to face those traumas more fearlessly and not avoid them as much. And this, of course, helps you identify what the problems are and increases your awareness and allows you to actually do something about it. But most of you are so afraid to face what happened that you can't possibly do anything about it. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to be unconsciously controlled by those traumas, by those things that have happened to you. So you have to have a therapist, a counselor, a friend. You have to spend a lot of time in deep thought. So wake up early in the morning, think about it, ask yourself tough questions, have conversations about this. this is not wasted time. And again, a lot of you are very, proactive and you're all about action. And I understand. I see this happen a lot with men. They're like, I don't have time for that shit. No, you need to make time for that shit. Because that shit is preventing you from moving as fast as you want. And you're sitting here thinking you're running fast, but you're really not. What you really lack is that freedom, that freeness that comes from being aware of the pain and having integrated the realities of that pain in your life in such a way that allows you to move and not be driving with the emergency brake on. So facing the reality of the past is incredibly important. And again, it's a messy stage. You should always be doing that, but that's really a phase you need to initiate and really attack it aggressively. All right. Now, in the case of religion, you want to study the history of your religion. This is important for anyone who has committed their lives to a religion that was created by other human beings. Now, I understand that these human beings who you think wrote your Bible, Quran, etc., I understand that you believe they were inspired by God, and I'm not saying they weren't, but they are humans. You have to understand that. And the structure of your religion was created by humans. You do understand this. So it's very important for you to understand the history, like really study the history of your religion. And this is something, unfortunately, at least in the church I was raised, they didn't teach us the history. Now, I don't know about you. Did they teach you the history in your church? Did they teach you the history of your religion and why you do certain things, when it started, the real reasons behind things, the darker parts of your religion? This is important for you to study, and this gives you perspective, and this, of course, helps you to identify new realities. And as you identify these realities, more questions will pop up. Do I believe that? Do I want to believe that? And this is all personal at this point. This doesn't have a lot to do with other people. So there's going to be a period of time where you get angry and you blame a lot. You want to get past that. Listen, this is about you now. This is about you understanding what you need to, because you're grown now. And hopefully you're at the position of your life where you're now interested in adding value to other people, and you realize you can't do that if you've got all this internal conflict and you're not feeling settled enough to be able to help someone else get settled. So once you study that history, then it's time for you to now start clarifying your new philosophies. Now, this is extremely important because what happens is there's a lot of people who go up to this stage, they'll study the history, they'll face the reality of their past, they have this decision about who they want to be, but they never make decisions about what they believe. They stay in this constant state of limbo. They're always overanalyzing what they believe, trying to be right. It's really a fear of not being accepted. It's really a fear of chaos and uncertainty. But it's this inability to say, yeah, this is what I believe, and test it. It's this fear that maybe, sometime down the line, you won't believe this anymore. You have to decide. You have to decide what you believe, what your philosophy is. No longer are you going to say, I'm figuring it out. No longer are you going to say, I'm not sure. No longer are you going to say, I guess. This does not mean that you turn into a hard-headed, closed-minded individual. It means that you turn into a decisive individual who is very aware of the fact that you don't have a lot of time on this earth and you can't afford to waste it waffling, being on the fence the entire time. Now, of course, no one has all the answers, and I'm not suggesting that you have a philosophy on any and everything. But the things that are important to you, if you do believe in a God, who is God? What is he to you? What is she to you? What is it to you? Why does it exist? What does that mean for you? What's your relationship with this God? What role do you play in this, and that? You need to have a philosophy on this, and you need to write it down. This is actually something that I've recently added to what I call the scouting report. It's a God philosophy. Scouting report is really a detailed analysis of who you are, your philosophies, your past, how it relates to who you are right now. It's what I spend at least 2 months with all of my clients in the killer instinct process. 2 months developing deep awareness of your past, how it affects you, and of course, the most important practical thing, which is how to integrate it into where you are right now to get what you want. This is important. Clarify your new philosophies. Know what you believe. And this is tough. And a lot of times we're looking around for people to validate it. Who are you looking around to? Other people? With shit that they haven't even settled? Why are you looking at them? You should be looking at yourself. What do you believe? Because aren't you attempting to lead others? So how are you not going to know what you believe and you trying to lead other people? This is important. Now, once you've done this, now it's time to start thinking about others. Now what I want you to do, you have family that's disrespectful to you. You have family that tests you. You have family that doesn't agree with you. And you see this family. You go home for holidays. You see them every day. Some of you visit home a lot. Hopefully at this point, you're not living in the home anymore. You have brothers and sisters you are close to, friends that you've been close to. You see them. So what you need to do is you have to redefine your standards for relationships. You have to identify what you're going to accept, what you're not going to accept. So some of you got moms and dads who like to talk down to you, like to disrespect you, like to talk to you as if you're still a child, even though you're grown in your 20s and your 30s. You have to redefine what it means to be a son, what it means to be a daughter. You have to say, you know what? I love my pops. But I'm not gonna be spoken to like that. I love my mom. But nah, mom, you can't speak to me like that. I love my brothers. I love my sisters, but you can't treat me like that when I come home. I don't stand for that. And I don't care that you're my mom. I don't care that you're my blood. There's a certain standard that I have for my relationships. Same thing, husband, wife, etc. It's tough, especially when you've tolerated a certain level of disrespect up until a certain point. Redefine those standards. And again, that's what you have to do on your own. And then next, you have to communicate those standards to your family. So you have to have tough conversations with mom, dad. Tell them, listen, I'm no longer a Christian. I'm no longer a Muslim. I don't believe that. I'm this, or I do this, or I believe this. This is what I believe in. You have to tell brothers and sisters, I don't do that shit no more. You have to tell friends, I don't drink no more. I don't eat that shit no more. Now, you don't have to tell them in a way of I'm better than you. It's not. This is who I am. And it's important for you to know because I love you and I know who you are. And I expect you to respect who I am, not to believe what I believe, but to respect who I am. So you need to communicate those standards very clearly to family. Let them know what the disrespect line is. This is when you cross it. I don't deal well with that. Communicate that. And then once you communicate it, watch what they do. This is when you observe. Some families no longer going to fuck with you. And let me ask you, if they choose to not have anything to do with you based on what you believe, what does that say about them? Should you really be that upset? Not saying it won't be hurtful and not saying you won't have to go through a period of grief. But guess what? Is there anything you can do about that? You have to be able to accept that. Some people are going to say, you know what? Thank you for telling me. And they'll ask you questions. They'll try to challenge you. That's good. Nothing wrong with that. I love it when people ask me about my philosophy. It gives me an opportunity to further hone it, to further sharpen it, and to further be on point. These are good people to keep in your circle. And then you'll have people who act like they support you and then they don't show it with their actions. Do what you must. I'm not going to tell you how to respond to those people. I'll just tell you, or I should say, I'll just ask you what your standards are for that. What are your standards? So watch what they do. And then what you need to do beyond that is begin investing in new family. Begin investing. Seneca says this. Seneca talks about that. The ancient Stoic philosopher, he says, listen, if you don't like the family you were born to, create a new family. Guess what? Now I could be your brother. I could be your uncle. I could be your dad. I could be your little brother. I could be your nephew. Kobe Bryant could be your dad, your uncle, whoever else. Frederick Douglass could be your great-grandfather. You could create your own family. And beyond that, you can invest in friends and let them become your brothers. Let them become your sisters. Invest in new family who are in alignment with you, who encourage you to become who you are, not just reinforce your already established beliefs. I think that's very important to be around people who do believe similar things as you. But invest in people who challenge you to grow, who challenge you to become more. And this is hard to do. Because if you spend all this time thinking, guess what? That means you're different than about 99% of people, because most people aren't going to touch any of these steps. But you are. So guess what? You got to search even harder for people like this. You got to find people who think in this refined sort of way. You got to find people who want to add more. You got to find people who want to become so clear so that they can help other people become clear. Not people who are only trying to figure out what they can do for themselves all day. Only trying to survive, only trying to be accepted amongst their little old, already established groups. You want to be a part of people who are trying to add value to the world, who are trying to create new results for not just themselves, but for others as well. Invest in that new family. Find groups to be in. Find coaches, find friends, go to events, reach out to people. And then, of course, live that lifestyle. Live your lifestyle that you've identified. Live it. Preach it. Live it. Impact people. Create now your own legacy. Because it's your legacy now. Or are you trying to be, a branch in somebody else's family tree? I tell my kids this all the time. I tell my wife, listen, I'm the Don Corleone of my family tree. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not the third brother in my dad's family tree. Nah, I started my own shit. I'm on my own. I created my own family tree. I want you to create your own legacy. You create it. You be the head of your family tree, and everything branches from you. And then, of course, as you live, you modify and update your philosophy as you go. That's what it means to be a fearless leader and a fearless learner. Someone who's okay with saying, you know what I believed in, I no longer believe in anymore. I'm updating it. I modified it. I throw that out. Warren Buffett says this. He says every year you should throw out one of your most cherished beliefs. This is Warren Buffett, one of the best investors of all time, one of the richest men in the world, and also one of the smartest. So anyone who stays too tied to any one belief, this makes you rigid. This emasculates you. This confines you. You want to stay free. You want to stay smooth. You want to stay flexible, nimble. And this doesn't mean you're blowing the wind. No. You identify what you believe in, but you also are okay with the fact that life might show you different. You might have to modify it, and it takes a courageous person to do that. That's why I love Malcolm X so much. Malcolm X redefined himself almost at every stage. He said, you know what? I no longer believe that anymore. I don't believe that's the best strategy. Change it. And that's why his motto was by any means necessary, because he was all about results, modifying the strategy as it relates. So you can modify the philosophy, you can modify the strategy, but know who it is you want to be, know what results you're creating, etc. All right? So listen, you need your own philosophy. You need to know who you are. Any philosophy right now that you're wrestling with, that you're like, I don't know if I believe that, that was created by another person who was no different than you. Think about that for a second. Whatever religious philosophy, whatever book you read, books are written by people, right? They're not written by gods. They're written by people. And last time I checked, you're a person. You have a pulse. You have hands, feet, a heart, a stomach, a head, eyes, ears. Just like the person who wrote that book, who identified that philosophy. So it's time for you to be a man. It's time for you to be a woman and define yourself. No longer are you a child. It is our job as parents. It was your job as a parent to help you establish, to basically raise you up in their philosophy. But at some point, you got to leave the home. You got to recreate yourself. And hopefully they influence you to a degree and taught you to think for yourself. And if it turns out in their favor and they say, they believe the same things as you, awesome. If not, just as long as you're thinking on your own. Now, creating a philosophy is hard. Finding a group of like-minded individuals is tough. Knowing the right questions to ask yourself is incredibly tough. And this is why I created Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct is literally the process that I went through, very systemized. Each step, harsh reality, identifying what's holding you back, creating a very in-depth scouting report, developing a level of awareness that's uncommon to your peers, identifying the vision, establishing the goals, building the systems that you need in order to dominate and master your time, surrounding yourself with other people who live life at a high level, and then, of course, helping you establish what your own philosophies are, what you believe, so that you can be in control, decisive, moving like a beast, while everybody else is moving like peasants, rabbits, hopping around and shit, jumping from one thing to the next. You want to be poised, in control. All right, if that's something you need, go to imnotyou.com/KI. The last live Killer Instinct starts October 15th. You do not want to miss this. This is going to be an epic Killer Instinct run to get better every single time we're doing. This is the 8th time that we've done them over the course of the last 3-4 years. Over 200 athletes, entrepreneurs, 15 countries all around the world. Incredible process. Go to imnotyou.com/KI. Click the link in the description as well, and it will take you right there also. All right. I'm going to see y'all soon. Peace out.